Hey everybody, Max here with another New World video. In this video, I'll be going over my Hatchet and Musket build. Let's get into it. Max, but why would you make a video that highlights the Hatchet? It just got nerfed. Because it's still amazing. It honestly needed to get nerfed, and I even said that in another video. With that being said, it still has Berserk and everything it has to offer. Just now only lasts 12 seconds instead of the previous 15, and the cooldown is 18 instead of 15. This is a decent nerf, but not enough to completely ignore it. I personally love the idea of pairing this with the musket. I understand it's probably not the most min-max damage-wise, but the musket just feels so nice out of all the ranged weapons. After testing other ranged options, I love what the musket can offer and its versatility. It doesn't give you that wonderful AoE option that Ice Gauntlet, Fire Staff, or the bow has, especially for your big 50v50 wars, but the ease of use and sniping ability is so enticing. Imagine defending and just hanging out on the ramparts, laying heavy fire down.
What did I tell you fellas about shooting?
Aim small, miss small.
Aim small, miss small.
Boys, let's get into the builds. First, I want to go over the more PvE side of the builds, then we can go over the PvP side. For the musket, I prefer a more trapper build for PvE. So you want to start off by grabbing your key abilities. So you take traps, which you simply toss a trap down, and once you pull an enemy, they basically run straight into it. Then we want to go into shooter stance. So we take called shot, just a nice 5% damage buff if you ADS for more than 3 seconds. Then empowering headshot, which buffs your damage if you get a headshot. Then we grab shooter stance, which is great for the trapper aspect because you drop down into a stance and pop off 3 quick shots. From there, I like to grab my third ability, stopping power, which provides a nice stagger and knockback. Now we simply just buff the abilities we just took by scooping shoot more, which now gives our shooter stance 5 shots instead of just 3. Marksman, which if you get 3 consecutive shots, you reduce all other cooldowns by 25%. This is pretty easy to do, especially when mobs are just stuck in your trap. Now shift back to the trapper side and grab trap damage, which gives your traps a rend. Lasting impression, which boosts your stopping power to give the target the exhausted debuff for 8 seconds. Now we grab tactical reload, which dodging reloads your musket. It can only happen once every 6 seconds, but this is still such a solid boost to musket that I always try to grab as quick as I can. Then we get Sin of Blood, which is a nice health regen, and Double Trap, which is pretty self-explanatory. Here I like to go Kick them when you're down, which gives you an extra 10% damage to targets that have an active status effect like stun, root, slow, which are all part of the trappers like bread and butter. And that ability is probably one of the big reasons why I prefer stopping power over powder burn, because we get supplementary repulsion, which is a 10% slow for 8 seconds. So now you have 2 traps that stun and a slow, so the uptime of status effects is going to be through the roof. Why not buff it even more by taking empowering weakness, which if you hit a target with a debuff, you gain empower, a 5% damage buff for 5 seconds. So after taking weaken defense, a nice little armor pin bump, we get lethal combo, which increases musket damage by 20% when affected by any trapper tree status effect. So let me break that down real quick. So you can lay 2 traps back to back, pull the mob, then hit them with stopping power. Once they're trapped, you are now doing 35% damage, probably before they even break the first trap. Meanwhile, you pop shooter stance and unload into them, dropping the cooldowns of your other abilities just to be able to rinse repeat for whatever comes next. Vast majority of the time, that mob is dead well before you even need to pull out your hatchet. But let's finish off the tree with heightened precision, which is a solid boost to shooter stance, while you're aiming, every successful attack gives you a stacking 2.5% damage bump at a max of 6 stacks. Now we have 1 point left that can really go basically anywhere, but I usually like to grab Hustle, which gives you a small movement buff when dodging. So here is the final result. Now before we move on to the hatchet, let's talk about attribute points real quick. I primarily just go full dex since it's primary scaling for musket, and then hatchet has secondary scaling. With this build, you primarily focus on shooting, and if you, for some reason, have a mob that's still alive, you swoop in with the hatchet to take them out. Now let's move on to the hatchet. This build is all about the berserker side, so we don't need any range options since we have the musket, so we almost completely ignore the throwing side except maybe 2 points. You just take every ability on the Berserker side with the exception of maybe Desperate Refresh and Relentless Fury, where we instead grab Critical Throw on the throwing side because it increases critical hit chance by 5% for all attacks, and I like to take Rejuvenating Crits, which gives us more stamina back for light attacks. But to break it down a bit more, I like to start with grabbing Berserk, On the Hunt, Berserking Refresh, Berserking Purge. This gives you 20% attack damage, 20% movement speed buff, % health regen every 4 seconds, and when you trigger the ability, you remove all CC effects like stuns, slows, and roots.
You got a good eye, son.
Well, I'll be double dog damn!
Even with the nerfs, this is still an amazing ability where you use it if you are low on HP, you need to get somewhere faster, you're in a bind, and you need that added damage and need to remove status effects. Just so many benefits to this, not to mention it does some serious damage on its own. Now I grab Feral Rush and Raging Torrent for additional abilities. Then it's honestly just filling out the rest of the tree aside from the 2 ignored that I stated earlier. So rather than going through each one separately, I'll go ahead and point out some of the key factors throughout the build. One big thing that this build focuses around is light attacks. You basically never even need to press heavy attack. Accumulated Power, Fortifying Strikes, Enraged Strikes, Rejuvenating Crits, and Final Blow all focus on light attacks primarily. Another one is Against All Odds, which is huge. Increase base damage by 10% for every enemy within 5 meters. This adds crazy damage in certain situations. Defy Death is awesome as you are essentially T-1000 coming back to life, where if you were to receive lethal damage, you avoid death and gain immortality for 3 seconds. So here is what this looks like. Now regarding PvP, mostly wide scale 50v50, I keep the hatchet the exact same, and my big adjustments come to musket, where instead of trapper, I go more sharpshooter. Instead of taking stopping power and traps, I go powder burn and power shot, because ideally you're in the way back just tagging people with shots, using all abilities off cooldown. This is what this build looks like. These are the builds that I'm heavily considering running during the game launch, even though the early game it's quite difficult to get a musket and the bullets needed, unless you specifically prioritize that as like a key goal, which is the route that I would take to start getting mastery points allocated accordingly. But that's going to do it for this video. Hope you enjoyed my musket and hatchet build. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you like the videos, I plan on streaming live on YouTube when the game drops, so be sure to sub and hit the bell for notifications. As always, stay tuned for more New World content. Until then, catch you guys on the flippity flip.